Tony, brother.
What's
What's
going
up,
on?
man? Thanks for doing this. Another episode of the Sovereign and Optimal podcast. Obviously, I'm fascinated by not only honey. I use honey every single day for health and whatnot. But when it comes to the production of honey and the whole world of bees, that's somewhere that I'm still obviously trying to get more versed in. You're a bee expert. Been learning from you a bit, but just want to expound on some more of those topics in the world of bees overall. So, what does your background kind of look like there in that whole world?
Sure. Thanks for having me. I'm born and raised in the Redlands. It's down in South Florida, obviously, one of the southern parts of Miami-Dade County. I grew up, raising livestock and chickens, and I raised orchids. So bees are actually a form of livestock. And so it was just a new adventure that I kind of always had in mind because in order to really have agriculture, you need bees. Surrounding my neighborhood is all farmland. So, once a year you see hives out there. So I was curious with, the whole livestock thing and beekeeping. But it really didn't start until I started school at FIU. FIU had a beekeeping club on campus. And so that's where I began my beekeeping, which was about 6 years ago.
And why, like, livestock is such a broad thing. Like, why do bees speak to you more than all other forms of livestock?
In order to have, certain types of livestock, you need to have property. You have to have so much square footage per animal. And so with bees, as long as you have a certain, also with bees, you need a certain size of property as well. A quarter acre, which according to the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, is the agency that overlooks the program, that overlooks beekeeping. And so I have 3/4 of an acre, so I can have up to 10 hives on my property. And so 10 hives, each hive can hold about 80,000 bees. It's not that much space, but I'm still, contributing to the environment. I'm still being a bee conservationist, still advocating for beekeeping, just with, what small parcel that I have.
Cool. And when you're like advocating for the conservation of bees, like there's obviously probably a sustainable way to beekeep and then like a less sustainable way. Like what does that mean as far as like advocating for the bees? Like what does that look like?
Sure. So there's three different amount of beekeeping that you can do. They each have a category. You have your backyard beekeeper, which is up to 40 hives. You have a sideline beekeeper, which is 40 to 120 hives. And then anything over 120 hives is considered commercial, right?
120 hives.
120 hives or more.
And you said on a 3/4 acre, there's how many hives?
You can have up to 10 hives for anything over a half an acre, you can have up to 10 hives. 1 acre is about 15 hives, and then so on. Again, it's, there's inspectors and they'll make sure that you don't have too many bees. They usually work with you because bees are very important to us and our ecosystem and, how we eat. So to answer your question thoroughly, sustainable beekeeping, I would say, would be just getting the word out there and encouraging homeowners and businesses to use the unused land, such as rooftops, or like I said, a quarter acre, you can have up to 3 hives. So just, the sustainable part would be, getting the information out there and putting those bees out where they can be.
Cool. Yeah, because that's super important. But like when it comes to, obviously we always hear like, and bees are so important for agriculture, for us, for food, for the environment, for the world. Like I've heard so many times if bees die, like we would shortly die after maybe like, I'm not sure how long, but what is that dynamic between humans and bees and the environment and agriculture? And like, can you just expand on that a bit?
Sure. So we need our important pollinators to pollinate what we eat. Bees and the bees, butterflies, hummingbirds, bats all contribute to about 80 to 90% of everything that we eat. And so to put it into perspective, if you went to a fast food restaurant or a regular restaurant, if you ordered a burger, when I teach the kids or when I do my talks, I have a sandwich board that has a couple printouts and laminated things of a burger. And so if we didn't have bees, we would only be left with wheat. And that's because wheat, which is the bun, is pollinated by wind. Everything else is basically pollinated by our insect pollinators.
So it just keeps the ecosystem like thriving and going.
Correct.
Like the chain.
Correct. So not only are bees good for us, but the rest of the mammals, at least on this planet, also eat fruits and vegetables and things like that of that nature, which bees and pollinators, pollinate for.
Yeah.
They pollinate basically by accident. It's not really something that they're like, okay, I'm a pollinator, like I'm gonna go pollinate 2,000 flowers today. No,
Bees.
they bees, yeah.
Yeah.
Bees specifically, bees drink nectar, right?
Yeah.
And so what happens is when they go and land on the flower, when they go and land on the flower, they will make a hole, or if their tongue is long enough, their proboscis, right? That's the name of their tongue. If they can get to the nectar, right, they'll drink that. But in the meantime, the stamen and the other reproductive parts are there, and that's where the pollen clings to their fur, to their legs, right? So bees have on their legs hairs, like hard hairs, and also they have sort of a like electric charge to it. So it's kind of like a Swiffer. I don't know if you've seen the Swiffer commercials where they pick up dust and they don't even have to get near it.
Like static.
Like static, correct. So what happens is then the bee just goes from flower to flower, and that's how we get pollination,
so they're just
or reproduction.
innately electrically charged.
Yeah, their legs.
To like magnetically attract the pollen on.
Yeah,
flowers.
more on their legs. And of course, like I said, the bees are actually hairy.
Yeah.
So that hair consumes the pollen as well.
Cool.
Or lands on it, not consumes it.
And they'll collect the pollen, take it back to the hive. And what's that process like once they get to the hive to turn the pollen and just keep the whole ecosystem going? The honey, I know there's like obviously so many things that are happening inside the hive, but do you know the first thing that happens when they come back to the hive?
Yes. So what happens is a bee will fly out of their hive, right? And they'll go, they'll pollinate up to 120 flowers in one flight, right? They'll come back. And so where the pollen collects on their legs, on their hind legs, is known as a bee basket. And so that will lump up. And so when the bees fly back, as soon as they land, there's other bees that are by the door that will remove the pollen, and they will take it to where they store the pollen.
Wow. Yeah, I've done a couple classes, and I always see like it's so organized innately within their like instincts. Like they all have their own jobs. They know what to do. They know how to do it. Everything is allocated like in a perfect way. So like what happens then? Like so they're constantly going back and forth, those bees, the worker bees, right?
Correct.
And then the bees at the door are there to collect the pollen. And what do they like, shake their legs or what?
No, so bees actually have, 2 limbs in the front. So the bees have 6 legs.
Okay.
Right. So the 2 legs in the front, they're able to actually grab the pollen and pull it off of the leg. And so what they'll do is they'll carry that up. Usually pollen is stored around the brood, around the brood area. And then sometimes if there's excess space in the hive, they'll actually have a whole portion dedicated to pollen.
Yeah. Okay. And because there's bee hives and there's like bee boxes that the keepers are using, right?
So
is there brood in the hives and brood in the boxes, or like what is that?
So you have a bee colony, which is the actual bees themselves in a group. Yeah. Then you have a hive, which is they can be in the hive is the whole bee community inside of something.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. So a hive could be in a Langstroth hive box. They've used them in clay logs back in Egypt times. Okay. So the hive is the cavity that they're in. But yes, they can be inside a Langstroth hive, which is used for commercial.
Okay. And that's when you kind of give them the structure. They work with the structure given to them and just to fill out their duties. But
Correct.
if it was in the wild and they were having a hive, or not a hive, but I guess a more natural production of their own doing as far as the actual hive goes, how do they determine the structure of it? Like I've seen so many different shapes of hives, even if it's in the same type of space. Like what determines that?
Sure. So, good question. So a beekeeper. So there's two parts to this answer. A beekeeper is basically a facilitator. The bees basically do everything themselves, right? So what a beekeeper does is helps manage pests. So there's the varroa mite, there's a wax moth, and then there's the hive beetle, right? So there's a large wax moth and a small wax moth. So there's up to four. Varroa mite has been the most destructive, right? Well, that's another topic. So a beekeeper basically just adds space once the population of bees and comb has been built out to its max.
Because they're constantly hatching eggs.
Yes. So they're constantly producing if in the right area, but sometimes during parts of the year there's a dearth, which means there's not as much pollen and nectar available, so they'll kind of dormant. But the way a bee actually, or how a hive or colony picks out a space to live in, they actually have bees designated for picking out spots, right? So those are called. So they have
So
bees.
crazy. That's all that bee does.
Yeah, a majority.
Like
So those are
scouting
the
property,
they're
real
scout
estate.
bees. That's what they're called.
Yeah.
So the majority of the scout bees, which are older, those are the oldest bees in the hive, right? Those are the ones that can leave to go pollinate, right? And collect nectar, collect pollen, or they get sent out to go scout for new homes, right? So what happens is the queen, she will release a pheromone, and the pheromone will travel throughout the hive. And so by the time the pheromone comes back to her, depending on how strong it is, she will then put out another signal or pheromone in order to let the scout bees know, hey, we're gonna swarm, meaning we're gonna reproduce.
Okay.
Right. So
Like we're gonna change homes.
yeah, they're gonna basically split, which is according to Dr. Jamie Ellis at the University of Florida, it's basically the hives giving birth. So a half or a little more than half of the bees will leave with the original queen to the new cavity or new hive. And so when you see them in trees, or if you see them, within the trunks, it's just that some scout bees went, or a scout bee went and checked it out. He did all the measurements. He checked it, make sure if there's any elements getting in, what's the temperature like.
It's just
right?
like a beta testing group to see
Yeah.
if that area is working.
Yeah, and so maybe 10 or 15 scout bees will go out in different directions in order to find the best home, right? But it doesn't stop there. So that bee will then go back to the hive, and they'll do a waggle dance and tell the other bees, right? They do the shaking
like
movement.
coordinates.
Yeah, coordinates,
it's
exactly.
wild.
So then they'll take 2 or 3 other, or maybe 4 or 5 bees with them to double verify, right? So once they've all come up to an agreement of maybe top 5 places that they can go to, when they swarm, they'll land on a tree or somewhere within 100 feet of the hive. Why? Because the queen's muscles in her wings are not working. Because all she does is lay eggs.
Yeah.
Right. So she'll land 50 to 100 feet away from the hive, from the old hive, and she'll create a bivouac. Right. So all the bees will then gather around her. They'll keep her at temperature, right? Because her eggs need to be still viable, and the sperm cells that are inside. And so it's very intricate. Yeah. So then from 1 to 3 days after that, they will then, within those 3 days, they will figure out which cavity will fit the amount of bees that came with the queen.
That's like the most important.
Yeah. So I was getting a lot of calls from the prior job that I was working. I would get a lot of calls from February to about June. That's when swarm season is. That's when the most productivity is going on. In South Florida, we don't really get cold. So we have an advantage. There's basically pollen year round, but the most amount of pollen and nectar is during February to about the beginning of summer months. But
Is swarm season the same as honey production season?
Yes. Okay. So when there's pollen and nectar available, so then the queen will then start laying more eggs because the temperatures are adequate. They have to keep the hive at 94 degrees at all times. Wow. That is the optimal temperature. And so,
how do they, if it was somewhere colder, how do they produce that heat?
So bees actually thermoregulate. Yeah. Bees are cold-blooded. And so what they do is they will have bees in the front of the cavity or the hive, and they'll have bees on the inside, and they'll flap their wings. And basically what they'll do is they'll exchange the air from hot air to cool air, and they'll regulate it. And so they have enough movement of air, such as a house cat.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's so crazy how they are programmed with these skills and this knowing to literally produce the perfect conditions to reproduce, keep the bees alive, keep the queen fertile, everything perfectly going. Obviously, it's sensitive, and you could probably, I know the queens die pretty often, not often, but it does happen, and they have to like bring up a new queen. But before getting into that topic, like you said, the hive gives birth, which is just a crazy concept to break down because it's obviously we know like their hive mind, hive consciousness, they're all one consciousness, but they're just like nodes of that same consciousness. So they're all giving birth at the same time with the same goal. What do we know about like that connection between each bee as a whole?
Sure. Yeah, so the entire hive or colony, a hive that's producing and functioning is considered one organism.
Yeah.
So one bee is not a bee is a specific organism inside the hive, but the entire hive is an organism because it thermoregulates. It regulates air, right? Mm-hmm. So the other thing is essentially like a woman giving birth, right? Mm-hmm. That's part of her that's leaving. Yeah. Right, so that's basically the same thing with a swarm where bees are leaving, right? So you still have those instincts there, and you have the original queen that was already producing well, and she's gonna try to prolong the species, and that's part of the swarming.
Wow. And how long is an average queen bee's life?
So the record right now is, I think it's roughly, it's 9 years.
The Guinness Book?
Yeah, something like that.
Oldest queen bee.
So that's what I've heard. And so 9 years, but according to University of Florida standards, we usually let them go for about a year, a little bit more than a year. And that's because unfortunately the queens start to become faulty or not as productive. And so what you have to do is you have to go in, unfortunately kill the old queen and set in a new queen from a specified queen rearer.
So this is under a highly controlled, like, maybe not commercial, but like overseen operation.
Yeah, actually all beekeepers do this. Now, that's just, let's say you're a backyard beekeeper and you're just happy to have bees and you're not really looking into making a solid production of honey. Mm-hmm. That queen may last 3 years, but what happens is unfortunately is the bees themselves, so 97% of the hive is female, right? So 96.9% is female workers. The queen, which is also female, she's the only one who lays eggs, right? And then you have your 3% are males, right? So,
and don't the males like inseminate, or they impregnate the bees in the air, then they die or something? Like that's their one purpose, is to just like nut, basically?
Yes, yeah. Honey Nut Cheerio, bro.
Yeah, there we go.
So that's a whole nother topic as well.
Yeah. Sorry, we're jumping around. But
no worries. That's the thing about beekeeping is it's very intricate, and I've done 6 to 8 hour presentations.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So I have 5 or 6 different presentations that I teach at schools and at parks and clubs and things like that, places like that. And but going back to the queen, right? So the queen is the most important organism within the superorganism, right?
Yeah.
So the hive is known as a superorganism. And so what you'll have to do is, like I said, you have to go and kill the queen, set a new queen, and then if you get a fertilized queen, she can start laying right away.
You buy them.
Yeah, you buy them, and a queen can cost $20 to $10,000. It's kind of like racehorses. You can have a really good horse, and you're gonna charge for that bloodline.
Like queen bee trafficking.
Yeah, basically. And so usually a highly productive hive has 60 to 80,000 bees, can produce roughly 100 pounds a year, right? So
with how many bees, sorry?
60 to 80,000.
60 to 80,000, which is the quarter acre, like.
That's one hive, one box.
Hive.
Yeah, that's one box.
100 pounds of honey.
Yeah, 100 pounds of honey. So so that's basically it with production wise.
Yeah.
But going to the male, which is known as the drone, right? The drone, his only job is to inseminate a queen.
Yeah.
Right. So they're much bigger.
A queen.
Yeah. So.
Okay. Yeah.
Inseminate.
So the 3%.
Yeah, that 3%
is just
males.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so if the males don't fulfill their God-given duty, right, what they're put on this earth for, they will actually be pushed out of the hive, and they won't be let back in. Now, what they'll try to do is they'll go to another hive and try to eat up all the resources there while they're still looking for females. For queens, right? So what happens is all the drones or the male bees gather in a congregation, right? So all the boys get together, basically, right? Yeah. And they're waiting for virgin queens to leave the hive, fly as far as they can. I've heard it's up to...
They're not all going to become queens. It's just going to be one.
So going back to the swarming portion, right? So when the queen bee produces the pheromone, she's also letting them know, hey, we're going to swarm, so you need to make a new queen. They'll make 10 to 12 queen cells. Wow. Now, what differentiates a queen from a worker bee? A queen is fed only royal jelly from start to finish.
Yeah, but like the larvae of bee are fed royal jelly until a certain age, then they're cut.
Yeah, after 3 days.
3 days, but then you keep feeding that same, the queen cell continues as an exclusive royal jelly diet forever.
Forever, yes. Yeah. So royal jelly is a secretion that the bees make inside their brain. Yeah. And so this royal jelly is known to be... they're still doing tests on it to be anti-aging because a worker bee may live to be 3 to 6 months old when I told you, in fact, a queen bee can live possibly up to 9 years. Yeah. So, we're talking 10 times longer than the worker bee.
I take royal jelly every day.
So royal jelly has its benefits. And so what happens is the queen, I always compare her to like a large German cockroach. Okay. Right? Compared to the other bees. So when you are looking through the colony or through the hive or, on the frames, you'll see she's much larger. Her abdomen's bigger. Why? Because she holds all the eggs and the sperm, right? Yeah. So the queen bee, she's the only one who lays eggs, which is kind of a contradictory, which I'll get into as well. The queen bee is the only one who lays eggs at the time, because she releases a pheromone that dormants the ovaries in the other bees, right? So when the queen is gone, let's say she's died, she didn't make it back from her mating flight, they cooked her. They have a method where if a queen bee starts to become faulty, they will jump on top of her and they will raise the temperature and literally cook her alive. But usually they have a supersedure cell or an emergency cell where they're going to have one last queen, maybe a couple more. But usually the emergency cell is right in the middle of the frame. That's the last shot that they have.
Possible queen cell.
Yeah, last possible queen cell. But then, like I said, it's kind of contradictory because you can have a laying worker, When that queen is not present, then because that pheromone is not there, there's maybe a couple laying workers that'll take over and say, "Hey, I'm gonna start laying eggs now." But what happens is with that is a female worker is an egg that's been fertilized, right?
yeah.
And a male drone is a non-fertilized egg.
Okay.
So a laying worker hasn't been mated, and so she will not have fertility. So only thing that she can lay is drones, right? So she'll lay everything with drone eggs. She'll put 3, 4, 5, 6 eggs in a cell because she doesn't know what she's doing, right? So at that point, why do they do that? That's to at least prolong that bloodline through the male.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. So we touched on, the pollen, the nectar from the flowers, and then there's just so many things inside the hive that we could actually consume, right? There's the pollen, the honey, obviously the honey, the propolis, the bee bread, the beeswax, the honeycomb. Like what does that look like? Like what's the difference, or how do we extract let's start with the pollen, because obviously I know they're collecting the pollen, but how does it become bee pollen in the hive?
Sure. So what happens is the bee flies in, like I said before, the worker bee that will pull the pollen off, store it. You can actually get whole frames of pollen.
Yeah.
You can knock the pollen out. And then also there's these pollen catchers,
Yeah.
right? So the bees will fly in, and instead of the worker bee pulling it off, the crevice is small enough where they kind of have to squeeze through, and it'll knock the pollen off into a container or wherever you're catching it. Usually
And is that
to
on
the
the
bottom
cap
board
of the comb, like on that comb that you see, like where it's capped at the
Yeah.
top? Is that what that is?
So no, so that's capped honey,
Okay.
right? So you or you have capped brood. So when so I'll get through the layers.
Yeah,
Right. So you have your worker, you have your brood frame, right, from the brood chamber. It's about 1,800 cells or 2,000 cells, right? Because why? A queen can lay up to 1,800 to 3,500 eggs a day, right?
Okay.
So one frame is usually what she can fill up in a day, most likely more, right? If you have a productive queen, right? So within those cells, the first 3 days, they're fed royal jelly, right? And usually it's all females in one section. And then you might have in a different frame or a different part of the hive where the queen has laid just mainly males, drones, right? So the brood is in the middle. It's like a squished basketball or like a squished soccer ball. And around that is the bee bread, right? So you have the bee bread, which is it's nectar and pollen, right? That's been fermented, nectar, pollen, and water that's been fermented within the cell. And making it it's broken down more so that way the nutritional value is able to be attained into the baby bees, right? So, so after 3 days, they're fed bee bread, right? Bees eat bee bread. That's what they eat, right? Really? Honey is just an extra or like a canned good for them. Wow. So then you have your bee bread, and then you have pollen, right? So usually if you have a highly productive queen, it's all brood. So then usually you have another box that they'll put pollen, or you have a box above that which you put honey.
And is that just due to the quality of the eggs that she's hatching? Like she's producing powerful bees that are able to produce like full, as opposed to like a
batch of bees,
weaker batch of bees that aren't producing like fully like capped brood.
So the bees themselves will go into. Okay, yeah, so I'm sorry, and I want to cover the cappings.
Yeah.
So after 3 days, the bees will then be capped, right? Oh, sorry, I take that back. So you have your egg, you have your larva, you have your pupa, and then you have your young bee, right? So between the first 3 days, you're getting fed royal jelly. And then the larva stage, right? So it's a larger egg, right? It almost looks like a shrimp. They're then fed bee bread, right? And bee bread. And then Actually, don't hold that to me. I'm having a brain fart of exactly
Yeah.
what the
I mean,
law
you don't
reads.
live in there.
I've been, we don't want to give out wrong information either.
Yeah, of course.
So the larva is then still maintained and taken care of by the nurse bees, right, which are the youngest bees that are just hatched. Right? They help clean up the cells. They help maintain the younger bee, the larva and the eggs, right? And then once they go into capped, they're then in the pupae stage, which then they'll raise. They'll then start growing their wings, their eyes, right? That's when they start forming. And then once they've completely formed after 21 days, they will then essentially evacuate the cell. It's sort of like hatching. And so during that whole process, the nurse bees and worker bees will make sure that the most viable and healthiest bees are being taken care of. They will remove any bad cells, any bad eggs or larvae, or ones that died by accident, stillbirth sort of kind of thing. And so then once that's capped brood, which is where the bees are being made, right? And then you have capped honey cells, right? So once it's capped, that means that it's honey, that is ready for extraction.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the pollen. I mean, that's the bread and that's the honey.
Oh, so I covered the cappings, right? So now the bee bread is made around the brood, right? So those cells aren't usually capped, right? So those have been there fermenting. Some might be capped around closer to the pollen, right? Because what happens is they have the brood, they have the baby food, right? And then if they are really productive, they'll have sort of a capped layer of honey. And then, like I said, then the pollen.
Okay. And then what keeps everything together is the propolis, right? That's like the sticky substance. I've heard I've heard that they even use the propolis as their own like antibiotic.
Yeah.
Where
So
it keeps them healthy and sanitary inside the hive.
Yes.
It keeps the hive together. That's the most fascinating part to me because it used to be ancient civilizations used to use propolis as an antibiotic
propolis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When they were sick.
Yeah.
So it's just wild that they create this substance that keeps them healthy, keeps everything like sanitary.
Well, unfortunately, because there's a lot of pesticides out in the environment, the bees, when they go and extract nectar, they can actually get sick from the pesticides and the chemicals that are out there. Propolis is a antibacterial, antiviral, antifungal, basically anti everything. That is, like you said, their medicine, or they're like almost their formaldehyde.
Yeah.
That's how they're able to keep the hive clean. But what actually keeps everything, the propolis is what seals the cavity from water coming in, from air coming in. They plug all the holes, right?
Like
Predators, right? So I've heard of, none of my hives. I used to take care of up to 35 hives. Cool. So I never really made it to a sideline beekeeper, but it's really just time.
We're gonna work on that.
All right, perfect.
So he's mentoring me in the Helios honey apiary project.
Yes,
you got that going.
Yeah. So the propolis is what is layered within the hive. When you go into doing a hive inspection of your bees in your apiary, you use your hive tool to break the seal, right? And you'll feel the box come apart that's kind of sticky, right? So that's the stickiness that you're talking about. Majority of the structure, or all of the structure, is made with wax, right? So wax is made from sugar. And so what happens is when the bees consume nectar, those sugars go into their body, right? And then they secrete the wax from their abdomen. They have 4 sheaths or scale-looking type of body parts along their abdomen on the bottom, right? And so that they will actually open and release the wax. Now, what they'll do is, because of the temperature of the hive, right, they're able to mold that wax, and then they're able to form it, right? And then also, the way you get the hexagonal shell forms, right, of the shape is from the vibration that the bees have in a hole that makes the wax hexagonal.
So so we're talking about like how I've seen frequencies like be able to create certain fractals and certain shapes.
Yes, exactly.
So their frequency is creating the hexagon shape.
Yes.
That's incredible. Wow.
Yeah. And the bumblebee, the American blueberry bee, all are well known for their loud buzz, right? And also the movie Transformers and things like that. Bumble, right? So the bumblebee and the the southeastern blueberry bee. I take that back. The southeastern blueberry bee, right? They can actually what they do is called sonication. Normal European honeybees, they will go into the flower and they'll drink the nectar. Sometimes a bumblebee, which is native, the southeastern blueberry bee is native, they will actually use a thing called sonication, like the cartoon Sonic, right? They will actually shake. They'll create this frequency where the nectar and pollen will literally just come out of the flower. Now, in that moment, they actually create the C note, which allows them, could possibly help with levitation. So the bees can carry up to 10 times their body weight.
Wow.
8 to 10 times, something like that.
They're literally vibing.
They're vibing. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Nice. So we're kind of running short on time, but let's get to, because you said sugar and I immediately thought of the difference between, let's say the classic bear-shaped plastic, for lack of a better term, bullshit honey. That's just like sugar water imported from China, basically.
Yeah.
And then you have like raw, organic, unheated, unfiltered honey. Like, what is the quality difference and with the manufacturing of that bullshit honey compared to like something like Helios honey or some other good quality type of honey? Sure.
So what happens is right now there's a ban from China for bringing in any honey. Why is that? They're great at manufacturing things, right? Yeah. So they are able to, and other countries, not just them. Yeah. So we have a ban with them. Unfortunately, they're still able to smuggle it in from Canada and Mexico. And so what happens is they put 90% high fructose corn syrup, and then they add a couple food dyes and whatever other chemicals, and then maybe 1 to 10% of real honey. Yeah. And so the way you can tell the difference is, let's say that bear or whatever container you have it in, because honey can come in all different shapes and sizes. Over time, it'll become solid rock like a lollipop, right? And real honey won't get as hard.
Crystallizes.
It'll get crystallized, exactly. Which there's different types of. There's creamed honey, which is basically crystallized honey that's soft, which is another topic that we can go into. But what happens is now you have a tainted market.
Yeah.
Right. Or a tainted product that is being sold for a product that's supposed to be healthy, real sugar. Right. Now, another thing is what some apiarists do or commercial beekeepers. They sell combed honey, right? They sell honey with the comb in it. It's got the beautiful white wax on there, right? And so some beekeepers will actually, like I said, bees produce wax with honey, with sugar, right? So when there's a dearth or there's no pollen, no nectar available that has those sugars, they will put out feed, which is sugar water.
Yeah.
Now, if they want to, unfortunately, scam the market, they will just feed them sugar water all the time, and then the bees will then just create the stuff that looks like honey, but it's not really honey.
That's just like abusing them when they're not in season type of situation.
Yeah, or they could be doing it year round, and they're making boatloads. It's cheaper. You're just feeding them raw sugar, raw white sugar, and then you have honey. It looks like it, but it doesn't have the nutrients in it, right?
That's dark, man.
Yeah. So now going into a natural product, right? So the The bee takes a lot more time with evaporating the water moisture content,
Okay.
right? And so the optimal water moisture content is usually about 17 to 18% of water. And it'll have those extra enzymes from them actually going to pick up the nectar from the flower. They swallow it, they bring it back to the hive, then they will regurgitate it into the cell, right? So we're basically eating bee vomit,
Yeah.
right? And the
Taste.
kids always go crazy with that. Oh my God, right? So that has the natural enzymes and nutrients from the flower, right?
Yeah.
From the nectar.
As it should.
As
Unless
it should.
obviously there's pesticides, things like
Yes,
that, which most of the
unfortunately.
time there is.
According to University of Florida, Dr. Jamie Ellis and Amy Vu, I'm part of the master. I'm an advanced level. Sorry, I'm a apprentice level master beekeeper with the University of Florida Honeybee Lab. Right, it's a certification that anyone can start and get. It's a 4 to 5 year program.
So just to finish it off, like, why don't you just give us like your number one, what fascinates you the most? Like one thing about bees, about what you've learned, about your history with them. Number one thing that you can say.
Sure. So with me, like I said, I used to raise livestock. I used to raise chickens for the fair or for sale. We raise goats, we raise lambs. And so for me, the most fascinating part is how structured their society is within. There's a couple books out there. Definitely encourage you to read Bee Democracy. That covers a lot of what goes on in the hive, right? And then also, like, without bees, we don't have agriculture.
Yeah.
We don't.
They're just vital. Super,
Yeah, it's
super
vital. And
important,
so
necessary.
if we didn't have these important pollinators, like I said, the bees, native bees, what we also forget about is native bees. So honeybees, there's up to 9 species of honeybees. The bees that we have here are European honeybees, right? So they came over in the 1600s. But before those bees came, we have native bees. We have 5,500 native bees.
Okay.
Right. And so just the broad spectrum of these pollinators, and also, like I said, relating them to agriculture, relating them to livestock, and basically, I just want my planet back, bro.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same. I think it's a good way to end it, man. I know we could go for hours.
Yeah.
But obviously I'll be learning from you a lot, so maybe we can run a couple of these and kind of give the people more in-depth view on this whole world as I'm learning, as you're teaching me. So I look forward to it, brother. Thank you, Tony.
Awesome.
All right, man.